As a brief aside, due to the nature of Fire Emblem 3 houses, the story can vary depending on what route is chosen out of the 4 possible options. For this history breakdown, I will be using my initial playthrough as a basis, using a female Byleth in the Golden Deer route. Byleth Eisner was born on the 20th of the month of the Horse Bow Moon, in the imperial year of 1159, to Geralt and Citri Eisner, the current vessel of the goddess Sothis. However, during her birth, complications would arise and it would appear that both mother and daughter would pass away, with it even being discovered that Byleth had no heartbeat. Right before Citri would pass away, she would beg her creator, the Archbishop of the Church of Seiros, Lady Rhea, to transfer her crest, the Crest of Flames, into Byleth, hoping to save the child. This transfer would be a success and Byleth would survive, becoming Sothis' new vessel, while Citri would unfortunately pass away. Soon after her mother's death, Geralt, growing suspicious of the worrying behavior of the infant, would have his daughter examined in secret, discovering that Byleth still possessed no heartbeat. Now, no longer trusting Rhea, Geralt would fake Byleth's death in a fire and soon after would leave, secretly taking his daughter with him. Byleth's upbringing would be unusual, to say the least. Even as a child, she would rarely show emotion, with Geralt later commenting that he had never even seen her cry. To add on to that, Byleth would grow up around a band of mercenaries led by her father, which would no doubt result in her being around all sorts of questionable people. Growing up, she would eventually be trained personally by her father, and by the age of 20 would gain a fearsome reputation, becoming known as the Ashen Demon. It was also around this age when Byleth would start to have reoccurring dreams about a young girl on a throne, even having spoken to the girl in her latest dream. Waking up the next day while on a standard mission, Byleth would encounter 3 young students of the Officers' Academy: Edelgard von Hresfelg, Dmitri Alexander Blythed, and Claude von Regen, who were all being chased by bandits. And after a brief fight, Byleth would see an attack coming for Edelgard and would jump in the way, ready to take the blow for her new ally, only for time to suddenly come to a halt. And the same girl from her dreams would speak to her, chastising her for almost getting them killed before introducing herself as Sothis, who would explain what she had done for Byleth and turning back time in order for Byleth to not make the same mistake. And the young mercenary this time would defeat the bandit properly. Afterwards, the Knights of Seiros would appear with a former trainee of Geralt's named Alois leading them. Alois would insist that Geralt return to Garreg Mach Monastery along with Byleth, and on their way back, Byleth would learn that the 3 students she had saved just so happened to each be future rulers of the Adrustian Empire, the Leicester Alliance, and the Holy Kingdom of Fargus respectively. Upon reaching the monastery, Byleth would be introduced to Rhea, who would feign ignorance of Byleth's origin and would ask the young woman to teach the students of the Officers' Academy, even allowing Byleth to decide which class she wished to teach. Byleth, taking an interest in the Golden Deers, would decide to lead them for the coming year, and over the next year, Byleth and her class would be sent to battle bandits, crush rebellions, and stop nobles desperate for more power, as well as hold off attacks on the monastery itself from people calling themselves the Death Knight and the Flame Emperor. On one of these missions, Byleth would stop looters from taking a hero's relic, the Sword of the Creator, and upon taking the weapon, Byleth would activate a dormant power, and as a result, Rhea would allow Byleth to use the relic, which Byleth would soon make her main weapon. Soon afterwards, on a mission, it would be discovered that the librarian of the monastery, Tomas, was aiding in the Death Knight and Flame Emperor, and he would reveal himself to, in reality, be a new entity called Solon, who is aiding the Flame Emperor. Soon after this, there would be an attack on the monastery by demonic beasts, and Geralt would be sent in along with Byleth and her class to defend the students and slay the monsters. However, during this mission, a student of the monastery named Monica would stab Geralt in the back, fatally wounding. And while Byleth would attempt to reverse time and stop her, she would be interrupted by Solon. With Solon and Monica fleeing, Byleth would run to her father's side. However, there was nothing to be done, and Byleth would cry for the first time in her life as Geralt died in her arms. Soon after this, Solon and Monica would be discovered near the monastery, and Byleth would leave to take her revenge, cornering Monica, who would similarly reveal herself to be Kranya, one of Solon's minions. Byleth would corner Kranya, but this would turn out to be a trap, as Solon would sacrifice Kranya, ripping out her heart to envelop Byleth in darkness, moving her to another dimension where she and Sothis would be trapped. Seeing no other option, Sothis would grant Byleth her full power, but in doing so would need to fuse with her vessel and would disappear into Byleth's subconscious, fully becoming one. Now with Sothis' power flowing through her, Byleth would use the now fully powered Sword of the Creator to cut herself free from this dimension and would reappear on the battlefield before slaying Solon. Now that Rhea believed Byleth was ready to fuse with Sothis, she would have the young woman sit on the progenitor's god throne only for nothing to happen. However, as this took place, the Flame Emperor would appear once again to raid the tomb, but this time Byleth would defeat them, revealing the Flame Emperor to be none other than Edelgard, who would then flee with assistance from her servant Hubert, and would return home, taking the throne and ascending to the Emperor, and would immediately raise an army to attack Garreg Mach. Byleth and her students would defend the monastery, but the numbers would be overwhelming, and Byleth would be ordered to retreat by Rhea, who would go out onto the battlefield and would take her true form of a dragon known as the Immaculate One. And despite doing serious damage to the enemy's army, she would begin getting overwhelmed by demonic beasts. Seeing this, Byleth would step in, saving Rhea, but this would turn out to be a trap, as a new entity would appear and attack Byleth, sending her into a ravine where she would spend the next 5 years in a coma. Awakening after being pulled out of a river by a villager, Byleth would return to the monastery where she would meet back up with Claude, who had since become the leader of the Leicester Alliance, as well as the other Golden Deer students. Now, using Garreg Mach as a base, Claude would begin to wage war on the Adrestian Empire, eventually meeting in a three-way conflict with Edelgard and Dimitri personally leading each side. The battle would be bloody, with many classmates forced to take each other's lives, but in the end, the alliance would be victorious, with Edelgard retreating with the remnants of her forces and Dimitri passing away from his injuries attempting to chase her down. In an effort to keep their momentum, the alliance would attempt to take an imperial fort, only for it to be destroyed by powerful weapons called the Javelins of Light. However, not letting this set them back, Byleth and Claude would march to the capital of the Empire and would finish what the Emperor had started. And after pushing their way to Edelgard, killing all who followed her, Byleth would personally defeat and execute Edelgard, finding a captive Rhea as well as a note from Hubert, who would inform the Alliance that there was an even bigger threat to the people of Foldland, an organization known as Those Who Slither in the Dark, which Kranya, the Death Knight, and Solon were all a part of. They would then free Rhea, taking the Archbishop to the organization's base of Shambhala, where Byleth would once again personally confront the leader of Those Who Slither in the Dark, Thales, and defeat him. In a last-ditch effort to destroy Rhea and Byleth, Thales would have the Javelins of Light attack Shambhala, but thanks to Rhea intercepting and soaking up the explosions from the weapons, everyone would make it out in time. However, unbeknownst to them, the fallen hero Nemesis had been revived and would be freed by the destruction caused by the weapons. Now able to speak with Rhea alone, the Archbishop would tell Claude and Byleth the truth behind Byleth's birth, as well as the origins of the hero's relics, being forged from Sothis' bones and the bones of her children, and finally that she herself was Sothis' daughter, Saros. Then, however, the revived Nemesis would attack the monastery, and Byleth, Claude, and the surviving students would battle Nemesis, with Byleth and Claude working together to land a killing blow on the former hero, finally bringing an end to the conflict. Now, with all threats taken care of, Rhea would step down as Archbishop, and the Church of Saros would form the United Kingdom of Foldland, with Byleth as its leader. Right, epilogue. So, I chose to have my Byleth marry Claude, because I have eyes that work. Very little is known about the early life of Noximilian Coxon. At the earliest point we see him, he's already a middle-aged man married with 3 children, and working as an inventor struggling to provide for his family. But despite this, he was happy. One day, while on an outing to the beach with his family, one of Noximilian's inventions would go haywire and would fly off into a cave. Following after it, Nox would come across the Iliacube, a powerful tool which would grant power to those who used it, but it also had the effect of changing the people who used it. And after witnessing it fix his malfunctioning invention, he'd bring it back to the workshop to study, becoming more and more obsessed with the cube, ignoring his own well-being, not even stopping to eat or sleep. After some time, his wife, unable to watch him waste away any longer, would leave with the children to stay with her sister. However, even after discovering this, Noximilian would continue to study the cube until one day the debt collector would come, but not for money, but to give him the news that his family had passed away in a flood. And at first, the watchmaker wouldn't believe him, but then the cube would show Coxon the island being overtaken by the ocean. And with the sudden realization that his family was gone, Noximilian would finally snap, at first cursing the cube, but then it would speak to him, implanting the idea that with enough Wakfu energy, he could use the cube to turn back time and undo his mistakes. And with nothing left to live for, Noximilian believed the cube, discarding his old life as Noximilian Coxon and becoming Nox the Zalor, or Time Mage. Over the next 200 years, Nox would search the world, gathering as much Wakfu as he could, taking as many lives as he had to in order to fulfill his goal, knowing that if he succeeded, his action would be undone along with his family's deaths. About 200 years after his transformation into Nox, he would come across a man and an infant with an immense amount of Wakfu. And after revealing himself, the man would reveal his name to be
Tu goûteras à la colère de Gros Galop à Grane.
Gros Galop à Grane. Quel nom étrange.
a name I'm not nearly French enough to pronounce, And after witnessing his power firsthand, Nox would discover that this man was in fact a dragon. Nox would then spend the next 12 years searching for him, eventually finding the infant he had been with, now a young Iliotrope named Hugo, and would try to get the dragon's location for them only to be attacked. However, by stopping time, he'd escape, now following Hugo and his friends in order to learn the location of Grogolorogran. After Hugo and his friends would track down Grogolorogran, Nox would teleport to his location only to immediately be confronted by the dragon, who would do battle with him. However, Nox would be victorious, with Grogolorogran destroying himself to stop Nox from getting all of his Wakfu. Now moving on to the Tree of Life, believing that draining it will finally give him the rest of the Wakfu he needed, fighting his way to the tree and successfully draining it, killing all members of the Zeditus race in the process. Hugo would then confront Nox, trying one last time to stop him, and the two would fight, with Hugo getting the upper hand, but in the end, Hugo would be distracted and drained by Nox. Now, having all the energy he needed, Nox would activate the Ilia Cube, turning back time, now finding himself in the past. 20 minutes in the past. Now enraged, Nox would lash out at the cube, which would result in some feedback shocking him. And finding himself growing weak and now injured, his will would finally break, with the realization that he had spent 200 years laying waste to the world for nothing. And he would break down as the forces that had been gathered to stop him closed in. However, before they could tear him apart, Hugo would step in, telling them to stop, seeing that Nox was no longer a threat. And after taking one last moment to say goodbye to Hugo, he would teleport away to his family's graves, where he would finally pass away. Hello, and welcome everyone to a bonus match I teased near the end of last season, with a showdown between the time-controlling mercenary turned Professor Byleth and the inventor turned power-hungry madman with Noxmillion Coxon, to see which of these masters of time would walk away the victor should they ever come to blows. Now, as you've probably noticed in the title, this will be a match where I'll be equalizing a certain element of the fight. Now, to explain how equalized stats work, if I need to equalize physical abilities, the character that can't keep up with will automatically lose that area, but will be boosted to the point where they can still compete. Now, if this is only needed for one area, such as speed for example, the slower character is again boosted up and speed automatically goes to the faster character, but the rest of their physical abilities will be judged the same way I normally do it. I will still be going over these areas so that the audience is given a full explanation of the character, but if all stats are equalized, I will not go in depth when comparing them, and will instead give the reason why the match was equalized and then move on to the next category. Equalizing power levels such as magic, however, will be treated as though their maximum output is equal, and I will instead judge the category based on their variety and usefulness of their powers. Now, the reason I will be equalizing the speed in this fight is because during Nox's era of the show, the best speed feat in the verse was around hypersonic. Now, to be entirely blunt, Wakfu does get much better speed feats as the series goes on. However, there is no reason to suggest that Nox scales to these feats, seeing as they happen basically in a new era of the show. So, with all that out of the way, let's start by comparing these two physically. By the end of Fire Emblem 3 Houses, Byleth is a 26-year-old human male or female, with a male Byleth standing at 5 feet 9 inches or 175 centimeters tall, likely weighing about 160 pounds or 72.6 kg, and a female Byleth coming in at about 5 feet 5 inches or 165 centimeters tall and weighing roughly 138 pounds or 32.6 kilograms. Regardless of which gender is chosen for Byleth, they will have a slim build with surprisingly little muscle mass for their chosen profession. Spending much of their early life as a mercenary, it's no surprise that Byleth is in great physical shape, being a physically imposing opponent for the vast majority of fighters, even managing to hold her own against powerhouses that have spent more time developing their physicality than Byleth has been alive. And he was made even more powerful after fusing with Sothis. Starting with strength, Byleth is incredibly capable even early on. In 3 Hopes, she was able to effortlessly interrupt and stop a blow from Shez, and even sent her flying with a single thrust of his blade. In the first mission of 3 Houses, he disarmed a man of a heavy axe and sent him flying back with a single swing of his sword. He evenly clashed swords with Edelgard, who in a near-death state can throw a dagger hard enough to pierce plate armor, and can effortlessly wield a heavy axe with incredible speed. With an unarmed physical strike, he can harm or even kill a soldier in full plate armor. Being assisted with the Sword of the Creator, they broke a magical barrier with a single swing of the weapon. In the Crimson Flower route, a combined attack from Byleth and Edelgard guard was enough to kill Rhea's true form, the Immaculate One, who survived being engulfed by an explosion created by multiple javelins of light. With these missiles being stated to be capable of wiping out entire countries, calculated to be around island level. And while yes, the hero's relics do boost the capabilities of those who can use them, this is not purely accomplished by the relics, as even crestless characters who can't safely wield relics can damage the Immaculate One. And finally, she matched strength against Nemesis, who was capable of fighting Rhea 1v1 and killed the goddess Sothis without the use of a hero's relic. In terms of speed, he is no less impressive, being shown early on to be capable of dodging arrows as well as magic blasts from fireballs, and later on even dodging meteors, lightning, and even lasers fired from dragons, putting him at faster than light in terms of speed. And in 3 of the 4 routes being shown to evenly match and eventually defeat Edelgard, who can similarly perform each of these feats. In the Golden Deer route, Byleth also matches Nemesis, whom killed Sothis and fought one-on-one against Rhea. And in the Three Hopes timeline was able to react and even matched a boosted Shez, who actually manages to defeat and kill Byleth while she's being possessed by Sothis in certain routes. But when in control of themselves, they are able to fight evenly with Shez, who was capable of reacting to Sothis's time manipulation. Durability mainly comes down to scaling, but as usual, thanks to the plot of Three Houses, I am forced to recognize that a single well-placed wound can and will bring down Byleth, just like anyone else in his setting. However, he also seems to have a heightened resistance to magic-based attacks, as he can avoid anything from fireballs exploding point blank in their face, a lightning bolt getting called down onto her, and even survive a blast from Rhea's laser, which is powerful enough to vaporize fully armored soldiers and collapse buildings with a glancing blow, as well as strikes from Nemesis, who once again killed Sothis without a hero's relic, fought Rhea one-on-one with the use of the Sword of the Creator, and with this same sword could severely damage entire armies with a single swing of the weapon. At the time of his death, Nox was well over 200 years old, his body being sustained by the Wakfu he had gathered over all those years. Standing at around 7 feet tall with a slim build, Nox is another character with multiple levels to his strength, with a boost being given using Wakfu to boost his physical abilities, giving him the power to match and even surpass powerful beings such as dragons. On his own, Nox has only a few decent feats of strength, effortlessly throwing a Grombo dozens of feet into the air, and threw Yugo so hard that when Yugo teleported back to him, the impact sent the Zaelor flying, and with just his punches could send people flying as well as a young dragon. Then there's his strength when boosted by Wakfu. Depending on how much he absorbs, his strength can be enhanced to the point where he can match and even overpower Grogalorogran, forming craters with his strikes and putting him through a mountain. His speed is generally decent, being capable of catching an arrow mid-flight or keeping up with a dragon, and can even react to Eagle, his mutated dog which could run so fast it ran over water. His speed was also increased by utilizing Wakfu, once again surpassing legendary dragons. Durability might just be his greatest area, as he can survive frankly stupid amounts of punishment. He survived a beating from Yugo as well as a point-blank magic blast from the young Iliotrope, was blasted with massive flames and lava from Grogalorogran. He can tank hits that sent him flying as well as similar attacks from Grogalorogran, and he survived a sound blast that caved in the area around him and caused nearby volcanoes to erupt. And most impressively, he even survived this suicide attack from Grogalorogran, which could be seen around the world. Well, this is actually pretty even, all things considered. Both have pretty considerable feats and scaling that certainly makes this a contest, outside of speed. Yeah, this is just like the last video where speed is a pretty major difference this time, being so far in Byleth's favor that I need to equalize it, which I'll explain why shortly. Starting with strength, both have showings that would place them in the mountain level range, with Byleth scaling to the hero's relics, seeing as he can damage characters like Rhea and Edelgard, who can tank hits from these weapons, which are stated explicitly to be capable of splitting mountains in half. And with Noxamillion, it's far simpler, as we have a pretty blatant example of him putting Grogalorogran through a mountain, and damaging the dragon in single combat, even after he got right back into the fight after this showing. But the scaling is actually on Byleth's side, with Calx placing her at around island level, which while only one level above, is still higher than Nox, who also using this calc comes out to about large mountain level. Now to be clear, you can get Nox much higher if you interpret certain statements in the series in his favor, like how one character theorizes that Grogalorogran covered the entire world in fog, which using the same calc would place him at just over continental. However, seeing as this is in-universe speculation and is never confirmed, I won't be using this calc or its scaling. Speed, however, is firmly in Byleth's favor. as Nox's scaling only comes out to about massively hypersonic by scaling Nox to the speed of Yugo, which is still incredibly fast by real life standards. But the Ashen Demon has consistent faster than light scaling, so I'll be equalizing the speed, giving Nox a chance, but still putting him just under Byleth. Now, once again, you technically can get Nox at a higher level than Byleth, but this time it's less looking at things more favorably and blatant character wank. As later on in the series, Yugo does have consistent, massively faster than light speeds, which would reverse the reason I'm equalizing speeds. However, by now, the power creep of the series has far eclipsed Nox as the cast has simply gotten stronger and faster over the seasons. It's basically like saying that Raditz should be universal because Goku fought Beerus. It doesn't check out. And finally, durability, which, to be entirely honest, comes down to the same scaling as strength, with Byleth once again taking hits from characters who should scale to and above the hero's relics, including Nemesis, Edelgard, Rhea, and Shez, while Nox scales directly to Yugo and Grogologram, placing them at island and large mountain level respectively. Overall, Byleth is just over Nox in general. Not to an overwhelming amount aside from speed, but still enough to give him a general advantage over Nox physically. And so, I grant the physical edge to Byleth. For this breakdown, while I know Byleth can be equipped with most any weapon, it's really not up for debate that canonically she favored swords as her primary weapon type. So I will be sticking to the Sword of the Creator, as this is the blade she is shown using in cutscenes as well as promotional material, with the only exception being his appearance in Super Smash Bros, where he also wields the hero's relics typically used by the 3 house leaders. And while I did consider taking these weapons into account, as this is a composite breakdown, I decided against it, as it could give Byleth too big of an edge to the point where I believe it could change the outcome of a fight all on its own, depending on the opponent. Both versions of Byleth use the exact same armor and the exact same placement, wearing metal wrist and elbow guards and shoulder pauldrons on their upper body, and on the lower body a single knee guard on their right leg, possibly due to this being the one they favored in combat. Her primary weapon was the Sword of the Creator, our hero's relic created by Nemesis from the bones of the goddess Sothis. This weapon is a bastard sword roughly 5 feet or 152 centimeters long with a double-edged blade, with one side being laden with serrated pieces of bone, though taking a more traditional style near the tip. This would make the sword an excellent weapon for both stabbing and slashing, being a very well-rounded sword. But this weapon also had a secondary function, being able to break into segments connected by a cord, allowing the sword to function as a whip, gaining the speed and flexibility while maintaining its full power. Hero's relics in general are said to contain immense power, with Claude openly stating that it's said that these weapons are capable of splitting mountains in half. And considering the scaling around these weapons, I don't think this is just a legend or hyperbole. The Sword of the Creator itself is the strongest of the hero's relics, and is explicitly shown to be capable of wiping out entire battalions with a single swing in its whip form, one-shotting a demonic beast, which, along with 2 others, was overwhelming Rhea, who, may I remind you, survived a missile stated to be capable of wiping off entire countries from the map. And once again, while this is partly due to Edelgard and Byleth's strength, a combined blow from both of these two did kill Rhea. While not known for his arsenal, Nox can form a few weapons to aid him in battle, as well as use his creations to help bring down opponents. His most iconic weapon is the blade he forms in the vague shape of a clock hand, which he can channel his magic through. Going off the appearance of the blade, I'd say that it's a broadsword about 4 to 5 feet in length. The unique tip of the blade, while distinct, would make the weapon less effective with piercing targets, making it much better as a slashing weapon. Using Wakfu energy, he created a pair of energy hammers around the same length as the sword, which hits with incredible force, though I'm unsure if this is because of the Wakfu energy or his own physical input on the hits. Nox's armor is incredibly durable, surviving hits from angered dragons, molten lava, as well as withstanding 200 years of constant use. The Noxines were small, bug-like machines that he invented. They act autonomously, gathering Wakfu from living things and bringing it back to Nox either to gather for his own use or to store. However, they can also function as portable bombs, with exploding from the Wakfu energy within them, causing great damage to his opponents. Here we have a classic instance of quality versus quantity, as while I don't think anyone would dispute that one-on-one the Sword of the Creator is superior to most of Nox's weapons, there is an argument to be made that Nox could have the advantage thanks to his overall spread of gear. Starting with Nox's sword, while a similar size to the hero's relic, design-wise, the Sword of the Creator has the most advantages, with its tip lacking any design that would impede thrusting strikes, with a serrated side which would assist in cutting. And in terms of the weapon's extra abilities, While Nox is capable of firing projectiles, the creator's sword whip function has proven to be able to function at distances comparable to short to mid-range projectiles, and with just as much force, if not more so. The Wakfu hammers are a bit more even, wielding 2 of them but still lacking the range of those Sword of the Creator's whip form. Though thanks to these being energy weapons, they more or less even out the power difference, but Byleth's sword is going to have the range advantage. Armor undoubtedly goes to Nox, wearing a suit that covers the majority of his body and most vital areas, unlike Byleth's small collection of armor pieces that only cover certain joints that give them a bare bones level of protection. Not to mention, Nox's armor has been shown to resist far more damage overall. However, considering Grogolorogran, whose scales under Byleth's sword was able to destroy pieces of the armor with his attacks, Byleth can get around this. She's just gonna have to work for it in order to really damage Nox. The Nox scenes are the only thing that Byleth doesn't directly counter, as a swarm of them could overwhelm him should they gather enough Wakfu. In fact, the only real thing that doesn't stack up against Byleth is that they can't drain her Wakfu, seeing as the magic systems don't work similarly enough to be considered the same type. So overall, really, I have to favor Byleth, as while Nox is bringing more armor, none of his weapons have a direct counter to or even match Byleth's single weapon. And what's worse, that one weapon is capable of breaking said armor, meaning Nox's best tool are going to be his bots, that while yes, can overwhelm him, can still be taken out if they prove to be too much of an issue. And so, I grant Byleth the edge in weapons and equipment. While not specializing into magic or being as naturally gifted with the use of magic as characters like Hubert, Leonhart, and Lysithea, Byleth is still capable of using both offensive and healing magic. And considering that their unique class of the Enlightened One is capable of using magic, and in the Three Hopes timeline, Byleth's warrior gauge special attacks involves fire spells, as well as his regular use mid-combat, it seems like a reasonable assumption that Byleth is not only proficient in, but took an interest in magic as a fallback, for an emergency offensive abilities, or in order to heal allies or themselves if needed. Byleth can learn a decent collection of 6 offensive, mainly fire-based spells, the most basic of which is fire, allowing her to shoot a fireball at her opponents. Bolganon creates 4 smaller flames that will travel around an opponent before converging on their location and creating an explosion. And his most powerful fire spell is Ragnarok, which will cause the earth itself to erupt around an opponent, bringing molten rock up onto them from the ground. Nosferatu, while primarily an offensive magic spell, used light magic to damage an opponent, it will also heal the caster for half of the inflicted damage. Thunder will just straight up call a lightning strike down onto their opponent. And finally, Aura, which will surround an enemy in light before inflicting a good amount of damage. They can also heal with a small collection of healing magic, which will allow them to heal any nearby ally. However, they cannot heal themselves with this ability. Due to her lineage and the unique circumstances of her birth, Byleth inherited the Crest of Flames from her mother Citri. This crest grants Byleth a small chance, 30% to be exact, to regain health based on 1/3 of the damage dealt to their opponents. It also has a very slight chance of increasing her physical strength mid-attack and even preventing an opponent from performing a counterattack. Due to his connection with Sothis, he gained the ability to summon her mid-combat to erect a shield that raises her and her allies' resistance to magic attacks, giving them a +7 to their resistance stats, but it will fade over time. And a power originally belonging to Sothis that eventually became his own after fusing with the goddess is Divine Pulse. This ability granted them the power to manipulate time, stopping it as long as they desire. However, at first, while time was stopped they similarly could not act, it has been shown in the Three Hopes timeline that after fusing with Sothis and gaining full control over this power, Byleth gained the ability to move freely in stopped time on top of being able to rewind time to any point in the fight, to replay a situation, trying out different approaches in order to get the best possible result, or simply get a more favorable outcome. And while true, Byleth cannot do this infinitely, as while fully charged, she can use this ability no more than 13 times in a single encounter, but this would still give them plenty of opportunities to undo any mistakes, up to and including fatal blows. After studying the Elia Cube, Noxamilion learned to use the power known as Wakfu, sustaining his body, boosting his abilities, and eventually becoming a powerful Zaelor. As a Zaelor, Nox gained the ability to manipulate time, giving him the power to stop it, with the range, duration, and strength of this ability depending on how much Wakfu he puts into it. However, this power is not perfect, as the people caught in this power are not helpless, and powerful beings like dragons are able to break out of weaker versions of this ability. However, with enough Wakfu, this can be strengthened to the point where even these beings are stuck in the time lock. And it should be noted that he was successful in turning back time of the entire universe by about 20 minutes, meaning that if he needs to, he could likely hold nearly any target in place. He has the ability to fire energy blasts of variable strength that can be strong enough to send a young dragon flying, or more powerful blasts that a grown dragon had to counter, actually had to exert itself in order to counter, as well as being capable of firing energy blades powerful enough to effortlessly carve through metal at very high rates. He can also summon 3 minions to fight alongside him, one wielding a shield to defend himself as well as support the other 2, one that fires Wakfu arrows which can create massive explosions on impact and can be fired rapidly, and finally one with powerful physical strength, being able to challenge Grogoloragran and could extend its arms like whips. Not just limited to offense, he can also put up shields of varying sizes to defend himself from basic physical attacks, Wakfu magic, as well as powerful attacks from dragons. He can teleport short distances around the battlefield and even across further distances with more buildup in Wakfu. And finally, he has the power to fly, giving him enhanced mobility and an aerial advantage against ground-locked opponents, and depending on how much Wakfu is used, the speed he flies at increases. While both Byleth and Nox are powerful magic users with a specialization in time manipulation abilities, but spreading out to other areas, this is very close actually, with my thinking being that the victor in this category would only have a slight advantage. Starting with their most basic of magic attacks, I see no reason to favor one over the other. Both are projectiles that hit with considerable power, but similarly have both been shown to be capable of being evaded. Now with their more powerful attacks, such as Nox's cutting beams, and Byleth's attack like Aura, both being high damage dealing attacks. However, I do favor Aura slightly, as Nox's beams, while very dangerous, possibly even being able of one-shotting Byleth, they can still be rather easily evaded, as shown in his fight with Yugo, and most likely deflected with the Sword of the Creator. Meanwhile, Aura is an attack made up of light, meaning it's going to travel far faster and will be harder to dodge, though Nox should still be capable of it thanks to Equalized speed. I similarly don't think that Nox could drain any energy from Byleth, and even if he could, it wouldn't harm them at all. Wakfu energy is explicitly shown to be life energy, and magic in Fire Emblem 3 Hopes has no such connection. There's also the fact that Byleth can simply heal while dealing damage to Nox with Nosferatu and the effects of the Crest of Flames, which Nox doesn't have an answer for and cannot recover himself once he's taken damage, overall giving Byleth the better basic magic usage. And what's worse, Nox's trump card of time manipulation is inferior to Byleth's own. While both can stop time and move freely within stop time, but unlike Nox, Byleth can reverse time easily, even being capable of reversing it to the start of the fight if necessary, while Nox can only stop time, and unlike Byleth's time stop, Nox's can be resisted, rendering his most powerful ability a non-factor in this engagement. However, I did want to point out that I do not believe that either of these two would be able to freeze the other with their respective use of time stop, as both have been shown to be capable of easily moving within stop time. That's not to say that Nox has no options in terms of his magic. His evasive and defensive abilities are far better, being able to freely teleport while Byleth is restricted to the illusion of teleportation with her time manipulation, which, considering Nox can freely move within mid-time stop, along with his capacity for flight, meaning Nox will have superior mobility options. Defensive skills are a bit closer, as Byleth does similarly have a shield that she can throw up mid-combat. However, it's not as effective or versatile as Nox's, as it does dampen magic attacks, but Nox's shield can fully defend against both magic and physical attacks. Nox's best option in this fight is going to be to summon his minions and turn this into a 4v1, ganging up on Byleth and trying to overwhelm him. But Byleth could theoretically play his cards right, meaning even this strategy can be worked around, but it will cost him most likely over half of his Divine Pulse usage. But overall, Nox does get the advantage here, but just slightly, as his more powerful abilities are rendered useless by Byleth's own, and what advantages he does have can all theoretically be worked around with Byleth's time reversal skills. But seeing as that ability has a cap of 13 uses, I do favor Nox, who can freely use these abilities. But he does need to be careful and watch out for Byleth, who could just know exactly what he's about to try. But overall, Nox still gets the slight edge in special abilities. Like in all of my matchups, I will be using Star Wars lightsaber fighting forms to better and more easily describe how this fighter approaches combat with their particular style. Now with that out of the way, let's begin. Growing up as a mercenary under the former leader of the Knights of Saros, it's no surprise that Byleth grew into a skilled and accomplished warrior, and by the age of 20 becoming a mercenary almost as well known as their father, being called the infamous Ashen Demon, a soldier capable of turning the tide of an entire battlefield all on their own, without showing even a hint of emotion. Despite being capable in most weapon types available to Byleth, in all appearances, she is shown to prefer the use of swords. So her showings with the blade will be what I use to break down Byleth's chosen styles. Considering Byleth also fought entire companies of soldiers on his own, it's no shock that he would at least be somewhat knowledgeable in Form 1 Shicho. While often described as a form used by beginners or novice swordsmen, Shicho still had several practical uses in general combat, best being used to attack multiple, less capable opponents, or opponents wielding ranged weapons who lack the skill and equipment to properly counter. Byleth is also a rather nimble combatant, implementing jumps and flips into his combative style in a manner similar to Form 4 Ataru. Ataru as a main form mainly taught the user to stay in constant motion and would deliver an unending flurry of attacks to overwhelm an opponent's defense. Some downsides of this form, however, that quickly ate up at a user's stamina, making it impractical against multiple opponents or a long-term engagement, as well as simply not being practical in confined spaces where the user could not keep up with their momentum. There's also his willingness to implement hand-to-hand combat in tandem with his blade sequences, even going as far as to create openings in order to deliver a disorienting strike to the head, as shown in their first fight with Shez, showing a willingness to implement her entire body as a weapon. However, due to them not fully committing to this form's more acrobatic style, I believe that they merely took elements of it to further elevate their already established style of combat. However, her main combat style involved the Form 5 variation Gemso. This was a style primarily developed for blade-on-blade combat, utilizing a combination of blocks and parries. A Gemso user maintained a proper foundation of defense against both ranged and melee attacks. Immediately after defending against an opponent's strike, a Gemso stylist followed with an attack on their own, bringing the force of the opponent's own blow against them and seeking to dominate the duel. Gemso also placed a heavy focus on brute strength and pure power, with wide, powerful strikes parries followed immediately by a counterattack. Falling in line with the Xian version of this form, Byleth also had a tendency to switch from a standard grip to a reverse grip in certain situations, typically in order to deliver a wider, more powerful swing at their weapon. And finally, there was their use of Form 6 Naiman. This fighting style was a hybrid martial art created by effectively combining elements of the other lightsaber forms into a single, generalized form. Naiman balanced out the various specializations of the other forms, covering many of the basic moves but focusing on overall moderation. This would allow Byleth to more easily transition between the forms as he desired, while keeping a constant offensive. Another aspect of this lightsaber form is that it was far more direct and integrated with its use of force abilities, or in Byleth's case, magic spells into combat, allowing him to fire off a spell without interrupting the flow of a fight. This is best shown in the Three Hopes timeline, when, while playing as Byleth, it is made explicitly clear that she regularly implemented magic into her sword sequences, either by imbuing their blade with fire magic or casting a spell mid-combo to deliver a devastating strike. Tactically, Byleth is nothing short of a genius, being capable of leading their class into war zones and taking out entire enemy forces without suffering a single casualty on their end, often being able to outmaneuver the tactical minds of Dimitri, Edelgard, Claude, and Rhea depending on the chosen route, with Claude being well known for his dirty tactics and schemes turning the tide of battles, and Rhea having centuries of combat and leadership experience to fall back on. In the Golden Deer route, alongside Claude, he was able to outfight Nemesis, who was able to kill Sothis without the powers of Hero's Relic, and thanks to the power of Divine Pulse, Byleth could experiment different tactics on her opponents much more safely than a standard fighter would be able to. Nox is very particular in the way he fights, always being sure never to use more Wakfu energy than he would gain from his targets, and as such, he often aims to end a fight as fast as he can, going for precise, instant kill strikes as well as disabling his opponents with his abilities, or if the target is powerful enough to justify it, using high power attacks to bring down powerful opponents right at the start of the fight. Nox will often start a fight by testing his opponent in order to gauge their abilities and respond accordingly. However, this has been shown to backfire if his target wasn't going all out or is capable of increasing their strength throughout the fight, often resulting in Nox being taken off guard and left open or being unable to respond to an attack he couldn't have anticipated. Nox typically prefers to fight with his powers over his physical attacks, but isn't opposed to getting physical in combat, and is a surprisingly nimble and fast-moving fighter when he does, often using his high speeds to dart around the battlefield or simply teleport before striking his opponent, in a manner similar to Form 4 Ataru, though a basic usage of it. Ataru is an aggressive, rushdown-based fighting style meant to overwhelm an opponent, and this form had two main weaknesses. The first being that it's difficult to use in small spaces due to the inability to fully utilize the form's high maneuverability needs without much space. However, his teleportation ability could minimize this factor. And the second weakness is that the form is a very taxing fighting style that was designed for short-term engagements which would end quickly. Overall, with about 200 years of combat experience, Nox is a skilled opponent that anyone would need to be careful of going up against, as a single mistake can give him the opportunity to instantly end the engagement, and Nox is exactly the sort of person to take it. Well, truth be told, this category mostly speaks for itself, as while Nox is a great fighter, being able to take on most combatants thanks to his mixture of ruthlessness and cunning tactics, I don't think I'll find many who can test that Byleth is similarly as ruthless, as she remained emotionless while executing fellow mercenaries as shown in the main timeline, where he killed Shez along with their entire company, but more importantly is a superior sword fighter to Nox. But even so, I will still break it down. Truth be told, I don't think Byleth is even going to attempt the use of Shicho on Nox, as she's going to immediately realize that he isn't some helpless warrior and would be able to counter it. Now, to give Nox credit, he'd easily dominate if Byleth fell back on Ataru, as not only is it Nox's primary combat style, while Byleth simply takes elements of it to push advantages when possible, which would be exceptionally hard against a fighter who uses it as their primary style of combat. But also, Nox's flight grants an unmatched mobility advantage that Byleth wouldn't be able to match. Byleth's primary gemso usage, on the other hand, is going to be hard for Nox to match. While true, Nox's specialization could prove to be a challenge, we've never seen Nox take on this Stonewall style of defense and counterattack, which could prove to be an issue if Nox is unable to overwhelm Byleth. While both do implement magic into their attacks, the difference is that Nox will switch between magic and melee as needed to get an advantage. Byleth, however, uses the two combat styles in tandem, allowing her to more quickly change between styles even within the same attack sequence, which would allow Byleth to push unique advantages on the fly that Nox would need to disengage and swap combat styles in order to similarly push. As tacticians, both are going to start off by testing their opponents, both of them likely going for direct counters, but Byleth is going to be the only one who is capable of gaining a full understanding of the other's abilities before combat has fully started, as it is perfectly in character for Byleth to simply spend a Divine Pulse to reset the fight. Now, in fairness, Nox is smart enough to put this together, as he's going to pick up on an opponent he's never faced before, taking on everything he has and perfectly matching it. But Byleth would still have the advantage of knowing Nox's moveset from a previously undone version of their fight, while Nox would need to learn and adapt on the fly against an opponent who knows everything. There's also the fact that Byleth is simply a better strategist. True, Nox is a cunning and underhanded fighter who will use whatever means necessary to get his victory, but Byleth has dealt with opponents like this before, even outsmarting the likes of Rhea and Klon von Regan, with the latter similarly being an underhanded schemer who will push any advantage possible, and the former having hundreds of years of combat experience outsmarting other factions and combatants just like Nox. And so, I give Byleth the edge in combat skills and tactics. Right, so before I get into this fight, to avoid any confusion, I will be using female pronouns and fan art for Byleth in this fight. And if I use this character again in the future, I'll likely continue to make Byleth the opposite gender to their opponent to avoid confusion with the swapping genders. Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place at Garrick Mach right before Byleth meets with the lord she had sided with, but comes across Nox hunting for Wakfu along the way. Oh? What's this? The Zaylor said, floating down behind Byleth, the pair staring each other down. Byleth sizing up this strange man. However, Nox seemed to be more curious of the mercenary in front of him, feeling a strange yet familiar energy. You seem awfully peculiar. Something about you feels interesting. Byleth, however, doesn't say a word, getting into a defensive stance and drawing her sword. Nox, having decided to test Byleth, teleports to her back and fires a small blast. However, Byleth seems to anticipate this, spinning around and moving out of the way at the same time, and activating the Sword of the Creator's whip form and taking a strike at the Zaylor, cutting right into his chest plate. The elder man reacted in shock, bringing his hand to the dented metal before slowly coming to be amused. letting out a growing cackle as he lifted his head. "Oh, how splendid," Nox says, assuming that someone with this much strength must at least have a decent amount of Wakfu, and that he would very much like to have it. Forming his blade, Nox moves it, forcing Byleth to retract her sword and taking a few defensive moves, blocking his blows before using her blade to shift his own to the side and thrust it forward, piercing his shoulder. Before Byleth can follow up, Nox teleports back, now once again floating over her and holding his shoulder. Byleth immediately responds, sending a few fireballs his way. However, each of them are deflected or simply blocked with his shield. And deciding that Byleth isn't worth the time fighting normally, he activates his magic, freezing time around them before teleporting back down and having a few Noxians go over towards the professor. However, to his shock, Byleth immediately charges him again, swinging down with her blade. And while Nox is taken off guard by this, he's able to block with his own weapon quickly, lashing out with a series of blows that push Byleth back, but ultimately fails to land any blows. "How? Are you a Zalor as well? No, I'd feel your Wakfu. What are you?" Seeing an opening, Nox parries a blow and reaches out, blasting Byleth point blank with an energy blast that sends her flying back. The Noxians coming back to him with no gathered Wakfu, despite the fact that several actually had landed on her and had tried to drain her. Nox once again takes to the sky, and with a blue flash, his 3 minions appear before him and quickly rush the professor. However, Byleth remains calm, unnervingly calm, and manages to hold them off rather easily, deflecting an arrow from the archer and landing a cut on the fighter, something Nox can't help but be impressed by. Unbeknownst to Nox, Byleth has restarted this section of the fight 3 times now, having spent the first time learning the basics and their general tactics of each unit, the second learning their level of coordination, and the third their actual skill, using her divine pulse once they had managed to land a serious blow. However, now Byleth is able to handle them, anticipating their moves with her knowledge, and very quickly she performs a feint, going to decapitate the fighter but quickly activating her sword's whip form when the shield summon goes in to defend the fighter. Twirling her whip, quickly getting her whip around its neck, and with a sharp pull back, she decapitates their defensive player. Nox watches in shock as she continues to anticipate their moves, almost though she had fought them before. No, he'd definitely remember someone like her, wouldn't he? This had to be their first encounter, so that meant no, it couldn't be, could it? Deciding to test his theory, he teleports in, swinging at full force with a Wakfu hammer, only for the Ashen Demon to evade the strike, jumping over it and spinning mid-air, bringing her blade down, Nox barely having time to block with a second hammer. However, even as he's sliding back from the impact, he begins to laugh. That strike was on a whim. Even if you knew me, there's no way you could have anticipated it unless you already knew it was coming. Byleth's eyes widen as Nox seems to figure out her secret, being too stunned to react as Nox teleports away and a series of arrows hit her, exploding on impact. Byleth is thrown back, flying through a wall, and while it hurt, she knew this wasn't a fatal blow and couldn't justify using Divine Pulse at the moment. Getting to her feet, she blocks a blow from the fighter, imbuing her blade with electricity, shocking it and giving her the extra power she needs to cut right through its arms. Then, in a split second, she impales it through the throat, taking it out. Calmly walking back into the courtyard, Byleth wipes the blood off of her face. Immediately, Nox would close in, trying to overwhelm Byleth but being unable to move past her defensive stance. Meanwhile, the ranged minion readies a powerful shot, only for the ground to suddenly erupt under it after Byleth takes a moment to cast Ragnarok, before immediately parrying another strike from Nox. With his last minion taken out, Nox starts to ramp up the pressure, forming his Wakfu hammers and slamming into her repeatedly. Byleth doing everything she can to keep up, resulting in a short stalemate. However, eventually, Nox decides he's done playing around. He can't lose. If this woman could really reverse time, then he needed to study her. He begins teleporting rapidly, not yet deciding when he's going to strike before once again, on a whim, teleporting right next to Byleth and swinging at her head for a knockout strike, only for the Ashen Demon to block the weapon with her sword. And as Nox moves his second hammer in, as he anticipated her being able to counter his surprise attack, she places her hand against his chest and instantly blasts him point blank with a powerful fireball, with even Nox not being able to guess that she would damage herself in order to land a hit on him, knocking the Zalor to the ground and thrusting her blade down into his chest, fatally wounding Nox and pinning him to the ground. The man tries to push the blade out, but he quickly grows far too weak, his arms falling to his sides as the light leaves his eyes for the final time. And with that, I declare Byleth Eisner, the Ashen Demon, the winner. Well, I won't lie, going into this, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I wasn't too surprised by the outcome. mainly due to Nox's trump card being ineffective against Byleth, and Byleth's magic system working too differently for Nox to drain. And even if it did, Byleth could simply reverse time and undo the attack, countering it. Physical abilities was rather close. Scaling wise, Byleth comes out at just over Nox in strength and durability, but speed was firmly in Byleth's corner, to the point that it alone would let him take Nox down before he could even react in most circumstances. Hence the equalized speed. Weapons mainly came down to the fact that nothing in Nox's arsenal would stand up against the Sword of the Creator. Well, true, Nox would match the power and range of this with his individual weapons. Nothing in his toolset would let him overcome both at once. And what's worse, while he does have better armor that would protect him more than Byleth's, it has been shown to break from power weaker than the Ashen Demon's sword. Despite not having the time powers to contend with Byleth's own, Nox does edge Byleth out in the magic category due to his better variety, while Byleth is mainly an attacker with some healing magic. While Nox has better defensive skills and evasive abilities. And while this would certainly let him last longer and get in more hits outside of his summons, there's nothing that would give him a combative advantage, and unlike Nox, the summons get hard countered by time stop. Combat skills, while relatively close considering Nox by now should be a skilled fighter, Byleth is no slouch, and in fact has taken on multiple people with similar capabilities, such as Rhea, who should have a similar amount of combat experience as Nox, and Claude, who is a skilled planar and tactician, and in most routes beating Edelgard, who similarly can overcome both Claude and Rhea, with Byleth overcoming all of them depending on the route chosen, meaning that he held the most advantages here as well, with his defensive style countering Nox's and his better implementation of magic sealing the deal for this category. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you agree that the Ashen Demon could bring down Nox, or do you think that the Zaylor would find a way to take the Professor down? Let me know in the comments down below. If I got anything wrong, please feel free to correct me. Right, as always, please check out the links in the description to see videos made by other versus YouTubers I happen to like. And as always, I'm Ray932, and I will see you next time.